Well, thank you very much, Angelo. I didn't understand what you said, but I so much.
I said nice words. I said nice words.
That's what I hope.
didn't mention the time when we were coming to Berlin to visit you, and you were taking us to this little restaurant under TI, where it had this excellent German food, which it was a bit heavy for us.
Yeah.
But I said nice words how you started
Thank
the
you.
whole...
No, as soon as you didn't say the truth, everything is fine.
The food was excellent.
Well, I'm so honored to be here and so pleased to be here because I must say I have a very special place in my heart for Greece. And I've been coming up for my annual vacations in Lindos and Rhodos from time to time, mainly brought here by Theodoros Papadexopoulos, and I'm sorry that he is not here today. And in fact, by Kostas Bakouris, I'm very sorry that he is not here, and I hope that he will recover very soon. And what I found interesting was that I, at these occasions, spoke in the morning to one political party and in the afternoon to the other. So it was for me always a great honor to see the whole spectrum at the time of political opinions in Greece. And I must say I'm very pleased to see again today that there seems to be a great coherence between what has been presented by the opposition today in this 12 points and what has been presented now by the government. And I hope that out of this coherence will arise a very strong cooperation in order to translate these plans into reality. At least that's what I'm hoping very much. We have been fighting very hard globally to get the 9th of December as the day of anti-corruption recognized by the United Nations. And I think we should congratulate ourselves very much to this achievement. And in fact, it reminds me painfully that until 1999, in my own country, in Germany, and in most rich countries, foreign bribery was allowed. So many of the corruption cases which still occupy you here in Greece have been implemented at a time when, in my country, but also in most other rich countries, foreign bribery was not only allowed, it was even subsidized, it was even supported by tax write-offs and so on. So the Siemens case right now, for instance, is from a time before 1999, when the OECD convention, which has been mentioned earlier, entered into force. So I have to say it is very much a tribute to poor global governance that Greece is suffering so much. And while I must admit it is for me very encouraging to see the self-criticism which has been presented here during this conference, I also feel that the international environment for Greece at the time was very much conducive to leading to a crisis which we are still facing today. And therefore I would like to talk a little bit about this failing global governance of which you are to some extent, or were to some extent at the time, the victims here in Greece. Partly because we are very reluctant in Berlin to pass judgments about what is happening in various countries. This is the function of our national chapters. And I must say, the national chapter you have here in Greece is one of the best we have in the whole global movement. So they are the ones who are your best partners. They are the ones with whom you should discuss what is happening in Greece. I'm very much going to focus on global governance, on failing global governance, because that's why in Germany, for instance, at the time only a couple of years ago, it was allowed, it was encouraged to go out and bribe in Poland, to bribe in Nigeria, to bribe in Indonesia, to bribe in Greece. And this is why so much of our money, of our contracts, of our deliveries from German industry ended up here in Greece and basically were the reason of your over-indebtedness. And of course, what happened then when the debt crisis arose was that mainly the banks, the French banks, the German banks, the international banks were bailed out. And people in Germany say, well, the Greeks, they got $7 billion from us, and why are they so ungrateful? Why don't they reform themselves? I think this is a very unfair argument. I feel this money was guaranteed by Germany, not paid by Germany or the Europeans or the Troika. It was guaranteed in order to mainly bail out the shareholders who made tremendous profits from a system of overexposing themselves here in Greece. And that I call failing governance. I mean, it's not only poor governance, it's failing governance. And I must say I'm very proud that Transparency International was able to play a role in changing the legal system and changing the general attitude, the culture in the world, in recognizing the devastating impact of corruption, which has been summarized so well today in this conference. Of course, it is inherent in our present system that governance globally has to fail because we rely too much on national governments for our approach to improving the world, for creating a just world, creating an honest world, and creating integrity in the world. The focus on national governments and their international organizations like the World Bank, like the IMF and so on, is basically outdated. And somebody has said today that we need a new paradigm of governance. Yes, we need a new paradigm of governance because national governments are simply not able to deal with the issues of global governance. There are at least three asymmetries of the capacity of national governments to introduce effective regulatory systems on a globalized economy. One is a purely geographical one. Everybody knows how multinational corporations, for instance, move from one country to the other. They close down in one country, they open up in others, they have profits wherever they like, they dismiss people where they like, they hire people, they develop innovations wherever they like. And of course, national governments are limited to their geographical boundaries, to their jurisdiction. So there's very clearly a total disconnect between the geographical reach of issues to be resolved and the capacity of creating an enabling environment for good development in a globalized economy. The second one is one of the time horizon of the decisive the decision makers in national governments, in particular in democracies. Decision makers are thinking of legislative terms, so they want to retain their power in 4, in 5 years, and many of the issues of global governance have a much longer time horizon, whether it's climate change, whether it's environmental destruction, whether it's poverty in the world, whether it's exploitation of women and children and so on. So it is quite clear that this difference of time horizon gives the wrong incentives to the decision makers in national governments, and this is natural, in particular in democracies. So, and the third one, which is as obvious as the first two, is that the constituencies of national governments are quite different. So why should a Bavarian housewife with her vote worry about, say, the melting of the ice caps in the Antarctic and so on? She wants to have answers to the price of milk, or the investment of a big coal power plant in her neighborhood. So these three asymmetries simply mean that national governments have lost their capacity to exercise the role effectively of creating a just world. So practically the primacy of politics over the market has been lost. And that leads then to many of the developments which we observe right now. And we observe right now about 1 billion people living below the absolute poverty line in the world. We see right now tremendous conflicts in the world. We see death and destruction in many parts of the world. We see refugees streaming mainly to Europe nowadays, and so on. And we see countries like Greece struggling to recover from aberrations of a sort of a neoliberal policy which is being applied in many parts of the world nowadays. So this is this failure of global governance which we have to focus on. Of course, you will focus on your national governance here, and I think what I heard today is extremely encouraging, and I really want to congratulate also to this new initiative at the OECD, which has been just presented to us. So we need a soziale Marktwirtschaft, as we call that in Germany. We need a market economy which is corrected, which is guided, which is regulated by politics. And not only protected the market against abuse like corruption or like trust activities and monopolistic activities and so on, but also corrected if the outcome is unacceptable. And I would say the outcome in many cases, including in some of the aspects of the Greek crisis since 6 years, have been simply unacceptable. And I'm afraid the German government has been instrumental in sharpening the tools which were used in order to undermine basically the possibility of this government, of this country to recover. And there are many people in Germany who recognize this. You will not see this when you read the normal German newspapers. There you will find a lot of hostility and distrust and so on. But in reality, this is being recognized. And I know that some of the politicians, in particular in the Social Democratic Party, they are changing their minds and they are changing their approach to Greece. And hopefully this will help you to find a better way in the future. So, what should I say? I mean, I think the changed paradigm of global governance has to rely much more on empowering civil society everywhere. Because civil society organizations are not subject to these limitations which I mentioned earlier. They operate worldwide. They don't care about national borders. They think of their subjects in a long-term and in a public interest-oriented way, at least the good ones. And therefore, what I was missing perhaps a little bit in some of the recommendations today, except of course in this wonderful presentation which you made about the watching Parliament and watching, I forgot the name, I will remember it in the future. But most of you did not give as much weight to organized civil society as we think will be necessary if we want to change things. That's what changed, for instance, the scandalous legal system of allowing foreign bribery which existed in Germany and in many other rich countries. This changed many of the things which seemed to be totally unchangeable, and therefore my experience with this interaction between civil society organizations, government and private sector, still with the government playing a lead role, this interaction of independent actors, in my opinion, can play a fantastic role in terms of diagnosing the problems of governance and developing reforms which are necessary and implementing the reforms in a credible way. Of course, civil society organizations have to grow into this important responsibility. They have to become more transparent themselves. I mean, the governance of civil society organizations is very often intransparent and therefore rather suspect. After all, the Ku Klux Klan is an NGO. So, I mean, they are very bad NGOs, and civil society has to avoid these trappings. Civil society is to become more professional, more competent. Therefore, it's so good that many of the universities are presented here to also train leaders of civil society organizations. Civil society needs resources, And I must say, one of the things which surprises me very much, if I may make a little footnote on Greece. I mean, I know that there are about $10 million sitting somewhere, which have been provided by Siemens on a temporary basis, on a trust fund basis, and which revert to Siemens if they are not used for fighting corruption. I mean, why are these $10 million not dished out, or at least $5 million, to Transparency International to do their good work? And if I can put this into your ears, I would very much like to do that, because otherwise the $10 million have to go back to Siemens, I think, under the terms of the arrangement which we made a few years ago. So, but I mean, the point is, civil society has to be strengthened. Civil society is under threat in many parts of the world, not only in Russia, and not only in Ethiopia, and not only in many other countries where the powerful people don't want to listen to reason. But they should be strengthened, in particular here in Greece, where you have such a wonderful national chapter. If civil society is invited to the table and can help governments, national governments, and the private sector to develop a better governance, then I think we can develop together and can look forward to a better and more just world than we have right now. Thank you.